Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to get relevant material and important updates. Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified, your one-stop solution to detailed analysis of current affairs which are published in the Delhi edition of Hindu newspaper. Articles dated 8th of November 2021 are listed on your screen, and the timestamping for these articles is already given in the description box. So let us begin with the first article of the day. Following the daily exercise of question mapping from UPSC's Prelim Examination 21, we have come to this question. The question 45th of Set A of UPSC Prelim Examination this year was related to the important division of land and area during the medieval India. The question says, with reference to the medieval India, which one of the following is the correct sequence in ascending order in terms of size? Answer to this question was option A. That means the smallest unit is Pargana, followed by the larger unit Sarkar, and the largest one being Suba. On the similar lines and similar theme, a question was asked in the Prelim Test Series 21 from Rao's IAS, covering the important topics of medieval Indian history. The question talked about the important provisional administration of Sher Shah Suri and its different aspects. When you go through the answer of this prelims test series, you will find that the explanation itself has provided the division of the administration into Pargana, Sarkar and Subas. That shows the kind of approach that is taken up by Rao's IAS in forming the question from the prelims test series, and this can also help the aspirants to frame the right theme and path to clear the prelim examination. With this, now we begin the discussion for today's DNS. So the first article for today's discussion was published on page 1st of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper. This article explicitly talks about the recent upcoming of floods in the city of Chennai. These floods are actually termed as the urban floods. The concept of urban floods has not been very recent. India has been facing the glut of these floods for the past many decades. However, because of the climate change, the frequency of urban flood has increased. And because of the ever-rising urbanization, the extreme events or the extreme outcomes of urban floods has increased to a manifold. So given the context of this article, this topic is important from the geographical events from the prelim examination, and in the mains examination it is relevant for your general studies paper 1 under the heading of geography, and in general studies paper 3 under the heading of disaster management. Content for this article would include the urban flood in India, causes to the urban flood, remedies or the mitigation of the urban floods, some of the NDMA guidelines, important pointers given by the Niti Aayog on urban development with respect to the flood management, and lastly we will look into one practice question attached to this topic. So let us start understanding something about the urban floods. Well, urban floods are nothing but a concept of stalled water. So it is a collection of water in urban areas or in the municipal area of urban cities. Or it may also be attached to the sudden rainfall in a small time and space. The first case was seen in Hyderabad recently, and the second case was seen in Mumbai. Cloudburst has also been one of the reasons for the initiation of urban flood in some of Indian cities. According to Niti Aayog, there are about 65% or just 2/3 of the Indian urban settlement that do not have master plans. And because of this master plan, there is a collection or accumulation of excess water during the rainfall season or during the monsoon season. As you can see the left side of your screen, we have provided the India's flood zone map. All the areas shaded in the blue color are nothing but the areas prone to floods. The coastal areas on eastern and on the western side are actually prone to cyclonic floods. On the other hand, areas on the northern part or the Ganga Brahmaputra valley is associated with the rainfall as well as glacier burst in the Himalayas. On the other hand, we have states like Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Karnataka and many other states where the frequency of flood is almost negligible. Approximately 12% of India's landmass is prone to flood annually. However, this map shows the actual floods which occur on an annual basis. As far as urban floods are concerned, we do not have accurate data or we cannot predict when and where urban flood is going to occur. The reason for this being many, and one of the most important reason being that the frequency of urban flood is very fluctuating. As you can see, there were urban floods in 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, and regularly each year in many cities in India. However, as you can see, there is no well-defined pattern. Recent flood in Chennai is because of the monsoon, which was developed in Bay of Bengal. Now from the map, you can see that Bay of Bengal lies in the northeast direction of Tamil Nadu. And this is the reason why monsoon which arrives in Tamil Nadu is called as northeast monsoon. When we talk about the southwest monsoon, well, there's a huge extension of western ghats between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And this is one of the reasons why Tamil Nadu remain on the rain shadow area and does not receive monsoon during the month of June to September. On the other hand, the winds which are coming from the Mediterranean Sea help in extending and intensifying the trade winds and the monsoon in the Tamil Nadu. And this is one of the reasons why Tamil Nadu as of now is receiving heavy rainfall. Now, given the discussion, let us look into what are the causes of urban floods in general. The topmost cause of urban flood as of now is the climate change. Apart from erratic nature of Indian monsoon, these 2 points are natural. However, there are many anthropogenic reasons or causes which led to the intensification of urban flood. The first one is inadequate drainage infrastructure. Most of the urban cities in India either do not have drainage infrastructure, or even if they have some level of drainage infrastructure, it is either dysfunctional or is not capable to meet the excess water supply. There is a rise of concretization across the cities, be it the footpath across the streets or be it the construction of building in porous areas. There is a concretization which reduces the percolation of water through the soil. Then we have terrain alteration. This includes the turning of flood plains into concrete or road or infrastructure related activities. We have been seeing the reducing seepage across the streets because of excessive pressure which is being generated due to construction activities over the soil. Then we have the lax implementation. Even if there is excessive rules to protect the urban seepage or to protect the soaking ability of the urban towns, there is lack of implementation. The urban authorities, including the development authorities and the municipal corporation, are very weak to implement the rules which are created in order to prevent the ecology of an urban area. We have issues related to the encroaching of natural spaces. It means that the areas such as wetlands, which are in and around the urban cities, are now being encroached by the human settlements. We are also going through the deforestation of the cities. The best example here is New Delhi, where 3 years back there was a controversy related to the cutting down of trees in order to construct housing society. And lastly, we have unplanned development. It includes the development and expansion of sprawls across the Indian towns. Now, given these causes, let us look into what are the actual mitigation efforts which we can take. Well, these are the important 5 mitigation efforts, which also include some of the guidelines given by the National Disaster Management Authority. The first one is need for holistic engagement. Now, what does it mean? It means that we need the entire social, economic, and political setup to come together and frame those policies which can help us to mitigate the urban flood. This includes the multi-institutional approach where center, state as well as the local bodies should come together, make a comprehensive policy setup to control the urban flood. We also require civil society engagement as well as citizen-centric development. India also requires to develop sponge cities. Sponge cities here means which can soak water. This will help us in absorbing the excess water during the flood. It will also help us to extract the excess water in and around the street, and it will help us to treat this excess flood water for further use. The best example is that the excess water which we are getting during the flood management could be treated and could be used for afforestation programs. We also require urban wetland policy. Now, what does it mean? It means that we should develop at least one small wetland in every 10 square kilometer area in an urban town. These wetlands will help us to soak the excess water which we receive during the flood period. And this also include that the wetland should have a forestation policies attached to it. More wetlands, more greenery means more water to absorb. We also need to go through the adoption of different technologies, which include bioswales and retention systems. We require permeable material for road as well as the pavements across the road. We should have the rainwater harvesting system as mandatory for both commercial as well as residential places. The best example which I would like to give here is the example of Tokyo City, which has created the buffer flood tanks. These tanks are so large that they can collect the excess flood water at one place, which could be utilized for other purposes in the time to come. And lastly, we also require drainage based planning, where we need to develop microecological drainage system, maybe a small colony or a small area which can meet its own soaking demand. We require contour following drainage system so that there is no water locking across the city. We require vulnerability analysis and risk assessment at micro as well as macro level, and this information should be shared at each level of governance. And lastly, we require climate resilient planning. National Disaster Management Authority in 2010 has come up with the following guidelines in order to control the urban flooding. These guidelines are also given on the website of the NDMA, so you can go through those guidelines in much more detail, as well as you can go through the second ARC report on disaster management. The guidelines which were given by NDMA included National Hydrometeorological Network. It involves the collection and assimilation of knowledge based on the early warning system. It has also called for providing early warning system by the Central Water Commission to have real-time information on hydrology. It also calls for Doppler weather radars to have better surveillance system. It calls for inventory of the existing stormwater drainage system in order to store water for the next purposes. It calls for catchment to be used as a basic unit for planning and designing the stormwater drainage system. It calls for the creation of road and rail bridges in such a manner to not block the flow of water in the urban areas. And it also calls for rainwater harvesting system in the urban areas, and this many agencies and commissions have believed should become a mandatory norm in all the metro towns or metro cities across the country. Apart from these guidelines, they have also called for creating parks in the areas to have more porous ability. They have called penal actions against the encroachment in the urban areas. They have called for compulsory and mandatory pre-monsoon desiltation process by the municipal authorities. They have also called for creating urban flood as a separate disaster in India so as to bring better policy formulation. They have called for bringing suitable interventions in the urban planning in order to reduce the flow of solid waste into the water sewage. Then they have called for creation of rain gardens in those areas where water drainage system is high. And lastly, they have also called for creating flood hazard assessment reports at the urban area level. And these reports should be taken up as the basis for creating master plans in the urban cities. Apart from that, one important thing which we can add here is creation of master plans for urban areas. Every city in India should have its own master plan in order to deal with natural disaster as well as the ever expanding urbanization. Apart from the National Disaster Management Authority, we also have some pointers from the Niti Aayog's report on reforms in urban planning. However, this report, which was launched recently, was actually dealing with the issues of urbanization. So if you want to read more on the issues of urbanization, which is important for your general studies paper 1 under society, you can go through the entire report. However, we have taken those points which are associated with the disaster management as well as the urban flooding. This report has called 5 important points to control the disasters, including the urban flooding. First of all is that they have called for creation of master plans at the city level. They have also called for creating smart and carbon positive cities. Carbon positive here means less pollution will actually reduce the probability of excessive rainfall in the urban areas. They have also called for the convergence of multi-sectoral approach, which includes spatial planning, public health, socio-economic development, and much more. They've also called for creating Apex Committee. Well, this is one of the most important recommendation of this report, that Apex Committee should be created at state level to review the planning legislation in the state. This will help the state government to regularize as well as regulate all the urban bodies, including the municipal bodies, and even penalize the administration for not meeting the demands of a particular plan. And lastly, it calls for the citizens' participation or citizens' engagement in dealing with the urban floods. With this discussion in place, now I'll take you to this important question. So, this question has three parts. The first part is the first statement itself. Year after year, urban centers are facing the glut of floods, creating life of people miserable. Now you have ample data. You have data such as 12% of the area is under flood. You can quote the examples of Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, and many others, and you can start your introduction with that. After your introduction, write the main causes behind the urban floods. After that, change the paragraph and put a different heading and provide all the possible measures or the solutions to control the urban floods in future. In the conclusion, you can quote either Niti Aayog's report or you can quote NDMA's quotations. With this discussion in place, now we will move to the next article for the day. This article got published on page 10 of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper, and this article talks about the important paramilitary force in India known by the name Central Reserve Police Force. Apart from that, there is nothing important to read in this article. The relevance of this article comes from the fact that in General Studies paper 3 mains examination, UPSC has a topic or the last part of the syllabus as various security forces and agencies and their mandate. So, from this perspective, we will read about the Central Reserve Police Force in India. The content of this article will include all the relevant information regarding the CRPF. CRPF was actually created before the independence. It was known by the name Crown Representative Police and created in 1939. So it is not the innovation of independent India. It is India's one of the oldest central paramilitary forces. In 1949, through the Act of Parliament, that is, through the statutory provision, it was created and renamed as Central Reserve Police Force, and this force has shown the brilliant example of work culture during the rebellious princely state of Junagadh, which actually helped India for its consolidation program. This can also be quoted as an example in your General Studies paper 1 under History of Post-Independence India. The objective of this agency is straightforward, that is to maintain rule of law, public order, and internal security in effective and efficient manner. It also preserves the national integrity and promote the social harmony. And this is one of the reasons why this agency is called during the riots also. The one thing which you need to understand is UPSC is not going to ask the mandate or objective of a specific agency like BSF, CRPF, ITBP or others. But what they can ask is the basic difference. They can ask us to list down the different agencies and their important mandates. So from that perspective, you should have the basic idea. From this discussion, we know that CRPF is not involved in the external security of India. They are not stationed at the border securities. They are not involved in collection of the intelligence like RAW or the IB. So they have some specific mandate, and which we have already discussed. Apart from this, if we go through the explicit function of the CRPF, we will find that CRPF perform the functions like crowd and the riot control, counter militancy and insurgency operation, the most important one being the left wing extremism. They are also involved in the protection of VIPs and the vital installations. They also check for the environmental degradation and protection of flora and fauna. This you should remember. They are involved in fighting aggression during the wartime, and they participate in the UN peacekeeping missions also. So this is also the important pointer. And lastly, they help the government agencies for rescue and relief operations during the natural calamity. With this discussion in place, now we will move to the next article for the day. This article was published on page 11th of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper, and from the perspective of math work, this article is important. The background of the news says that there is a rise of civil disobedience movement in the country Sudan. See, the country is Sudan, not the South Sudan. So you should have basic difference between both these countries. The background says that the Sudanese security forces have fired the tear gas at multiple anti-coup rallies, with the protester in several cities joining a call for 2 days civil disobedience against the last month's military takeover. Now, first of all, this is a civil disobedience, so it is important for your history perspective as well, because civil disobedience is one of the takeaway which the world community has learned from India's fight against the imperialism. The second thing which this article tells us is the places in news, and the places in news is Khartoum and the Sudan itself. So let us look at the map to understand more. Well, both these places are situated in Africa. This is your Sudan. It is situated in the northeast part of African continent and it has a connection with the Red Sea. On the other hand, the South Sudan is situated in the central east part of Africa and it is a landlocked country. The area which you can see over here is the Great Rift Valley of Africa and it includes many important rivers, many important lakes as well as the mountain peaks. If we go through the zoom map of this place, we'll find that Sudan has access to the Red Sea. On the other hand, we have Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Eritrea and Djibouti along with the Egypt, which have access to the Red Sea. On the other hand, countries like South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia does not have access to Red Sea. Somalia has access to the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Sea. The one more important thing which we need to understand here is the river Nile passes through Sudan and South Sudan along with Ethiopia and ultimately ends at Egypt. The another important learning which we can take from this map is that China has been building its military presence in the country of Djibouti for the past 2 years. And because of this, the sea lane of communication going right away from the Red Sea to the other part of the world including Australia and Asia has become a matter of concern. On the similar lines, India has created its defense base in Oman, Duqm. Similarly, there is one last important point which we need to understand is about this Socotra Island. This island is situated in the Arabian Sea and part of Yemen. This island was involved in the rescue operation of India which was conducted in the recent past. So lastly, we come to a point that where is Khartoum? Well, Khartoum is the capital city of Sudan and it is situated in the central east part of Sudan. With this discussion placed, now I will leave you with the important question to attend. So read this question carefully and answer in the comment box. This would be your question number 1. With this question at place, now let us move to the next article for the day. This article was published on page 6 of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper and talks about the view of the author where he has commented that jurisprudence was utilized in the recent judgment of the Supreme Court dealing with the arrest and the bail provisions of UAPA. Now, as per the legal framework in India, under the Indian Penal Code and UAPA, whenever there is a suspicious activity, the defense forces become active, file the FIR, arrest the culprits and take up the investigation. Then they submit the report to the court for the further judicial proceeding. In the normal case, what happens is that a person or the accused in the case get chance to prove himself or herself innocent. But under certain laws, that is under preventive detention laws, including your Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, a person who is accused does not get the right to prove himself or herself innocent. Under preventive detention law, security agencies can keep a person under the custody for about 120 days. And in this span period, the accused does not get any chance to prove himself herself innocent. And in same preventive detention laws, the burden of proof lies on the accused person. And in multiple researches by the scholars, it has been found that there are certain provisions in these laws which does not allow the accused person to fight for their own rights. Supreme Court in the case of Thawa Fazal versus Union of India has changed the understanding and perspective of Section 43D5 of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, thereby making it easier to get bail for accused charged under this law. It means that Supreme Court through 3 judge benches under this judgment has provided a simpler understanding of this section which would be used in order to get bail from the UAPA arrest. Now, what was the earlier precedence? In earlier precedence, Supreme Court under NIA versus Zahoor Ahmad Shah 2019 case has provided a narrow and strict interpretation What they have done now, they have provided a wider understanding. Previously, they had the narrow understanding of what? Of section 43d5 of the same act, which made it difficult. Now it is easier, which made it difficult previously to get bail for the accused charged under UAPA. Now, Supreme Court has made this simpler understanding under this case in order to fulfill the requirements of human rights, rule of law, and judicial process. Now, relevance of this article comes from the fact that it could be asked or could be quoted as one of the pointer in your General Studies paper 2, Polity and Governance. The content of this article would include the discussion on the section 43d5 and the impact of these two different judgments by the Supreme Court. So let us understand what is section 43d5. The section 43d5 of UAPA Act says that a person who is accused under the chapter 4 or under the chapter 6 of UAPA shall not be released on bail if the court, going through the investigation report or the case diary of the police, is of the opinion that there are reasonable grounds for believing that the accusation against such person is prima facie true. Now it simply means that if there is a person who was called as accused under UAPA Act, that person would be arrested by the police. Police will conduct the investigation and prepare the case diary. This case diary would be submitted to the court, and based on this investigation and the case diary, court will deny bail to the accused person. And because of this provision, many people across the nation were arrested on very limited understanding grounds of the UAPA Act. Now, based on this limited understanding, Supreme Court has come up with a new understanding which is simpler and which can be used in order to get bail from the court. In order to understand this in much simpler manner, let us go through the different judgments made by the Supreme Court. In the first judgment, which was National Investigating Agency versus Zahoor Ahmed 2019, under this case, Supreme Court has said that burden is on the accused, that is person who is arrested, to show that the charges framed by the state under the law is not prima facie true. That is, if a person is arrested under UAPA, he or she will prove that he or she is innocent. It is not the duty of the state to do that. Under this, the court prohibited thorough and deeper examination or investigation. Now, if a police or the security agency does not conduct the thorough or deep examination, that could be taken up as a matter of concern. If a person is arrested and there is no investigation, this goes against the human rights or the basic life or basic liberty of a person. So given this narrow definition, what actually had happened? There were hundreds of bail appeals which were rejected by the court, even when the evidences were false or fabricated. Now this is a matter of concern. Now you can imagine if the investigation is going on and evidences are turned out to be false. How can a person not given bail? And because of this provision, many people, many social activists, including Shudha Bharadwaj, Siddiqui Kappan, Stan Swamy and others were not given the bail by the police authorities. But this has changed after the recent judgment. Now what has happened in the judgment? The Supreme Court has come up with a liberal expression of this section. It says that just association with a terrorist organization is not sufficient to attract the offenses alleged. And it also says that just possession of documents or the books by the accused at a formative young age, or even their fascination for the ideology, does not mean that they are culpable under the UAPA Act. So it means if a person is found with a literature which may or may not consist anything associated with the illegal activities, that person may be granted bail in the future. This judgment proves that even the stringent provisions, the hardcore laws of the country cannot restrict, cannot curtail the power of the Constitutional Court. That means Supreme Court can interpret any law of the country if it goes against the violation of the fundamental rights. And here the fundamental right under Article 21, right to life and liberty, is important. And this case has also proved that the judicial process takes the primacy, that whenever a person is arrested, he or she should go through the defined judicial process irrespective of the law. And this has actually kept up the philosophy of human rights in the country. Now, as we have seen in the article itself, it was talking about the jurisprudence. Now, Supreme Court has come up with its own philosophy in order to interpret the law made by the legislation in the country. And this interpretation has been made on the pretext of meeting the basic human rights of the citizens in the country. This law, according to the scholars, may go a long way in order to provide the basic rights of the humans against the atrocities made by the security agencies in the country. With this discussion in place, now we come to the question of the day.